Okay, thank you.
I don't really see that, or maybe see that.
Okay, Kia koto. My name is Paul Benden. I'm presenting semi-automatic surveillance of using image segmentation of street-level urban trees on behalf of myself and my supervisor, Steve, who just spoke, Vivara, Richard Green, and our collaborators at the University of Waikato. This research was made possible because of the Bioheritage National Science Challenge. Oh, there we go. So some background. As we all know, New Zealand is an island nation, but we have surprisingly a high number of points of entry, official points of entry. So we have a lot of seaports and quite a few airports that take international planes. On this map, I'm actually missing a few minor ones, like there are a few super yacht-only ports of entry. There's a high likelihood, as Steve has talked about, of invasive species being established in urban areas, because that's where the high-risk biosecurity goods arrive. So, cargo containers, tourists with muddy hiking boots and that kind of stuff, and mail is processed in urban centers. If we, resize those symbols for the ports and airports proportionally to cargo volume for seaports and international travelers for airports, we can see that most of them don't really matter that much. And there's only a few areas, so Auckland, north and south of Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch, where the vast majority of high-risk goods enter our country. I've also overlaid exotic forestry in dark green and our conservation land in light green. And you can see that the vast majority of our native forests and our exotic forests are quite a distance from these high-risk ports of entry. So, if we can catch things in the urban centers, we can protect our native forests and our exotic forest industry from these pests and diseases. So if we zoom into Christchurch, this is Christchurch Airport, and you can see around the periphery there in the top corner, there are some exotic forest blocks on Maclean's Island. But each of those dots represents a Christchurch City Council maintained tree. The color represents the species. It topped out at 100 colors. I think there are about 120 different council maintained tree species in that area. And that of course excludes all the trees on people's private properties. There'll be hundreds more vegetation species in that really small area just around the airport. And as Steve pointed out, this makes this a real challenging problem. So there are two types of threats. There are known threats and there are unknown threats. So known threats are threats that can be anticipated, either because they already are in the country, or they're causing a problem in one of our major trading partners, or it's spreading around the globe and it's anticipated to get here eventually. These can be detected, using machine learning, using traditional classification models. You can train the model on examples of that disease and try and classify it. Dutch elm disease is an example of a known threat. The photo in the top corner is courtesy of SBS Biosecurity, some of whom are watching this presentation, so thank you for that photo. And Dutch elm disease was first discovered in New Zealand in 1989. It was thought to have been brought under control, possibly even eradicated, but a major infestation was found in 2015 on the grounds of a derelict former psychiatric hospital in Auckland. They were wanting to redevelop the land, so they sent in some tree inspectors to do a survey, and they discovered over 200 trees infected, and they estimated that occurred over just a 2 to 3 year period. And then they found it, of course, in the neighboring suburbs. The vector for the disease is an insect that flies. And now it's currently spreading around Auckland and south of Auckland. Unknown threats are threats that cannot possibly be anticipated because no one even thought that there was a possible problem. These are found usually by inspectors monitoring transects of vegetation for symptoms of possible problems. It's costly and it's resource intensive to monitor, so you can only monitor certain amounts of vegetation. Tree inspectors can't realistically monitor, for example, in Christchurch, one of the 200,000 Christchurch City Council maintained trees. It's every year. That's just not possible. Often these pests are first noticed after they've already established. The chance of it establishing themselves in the specific transect that gets a regular inspection is pretty minimal, versus its range increases until it intersects with the transect. So our goal was to build a machine learning / artificial intelligence pipeline that can perform anomaly detection to discover unknown threats, as well as doing disease classification for known threats by identifying symptoms in the pictures. The University of Waikato built a hardware platform that can mount on vehicles, and we and them are collaborating on building a software platform that uses monocular vision and stereo image capture. This is an example of a Basler machine learning industrial camera that we're using. These are really hard to get hold of. And this is a stereo camera. It takes 2 images and we can extract depth information from the image. The idea is to monitor urban forests in Christchurch, Auckland, and Waikato over an extended period of time. So I'm just going to briefly touch on this. This is our pipeline. So what we've done so far is we've built an image data set of trees in Christchurch. We've built an annotation pipeline, and we've trained a segmentation model. We're currently collecting more data in the field and working on instant segmentation model. Our last step, which I'll talk about later on in this presentation, is building an anomaly detection model. We'll then run this over a long extended 2-year period and constantly train and refine and hopefully come up with something that is quite robust. So first, what is image segmentation and why do we need to do it? So image segmentation or semantic, there's 3 types of segmentation. Semantic segmentation is the pixel by pixel classification of an image. So it's saying this pixel is a car, this pixel is a person. You can see there, blue is car, red is a person, brown is a pram. You know, this is the cityscapes data set. You know, if the data set has prams in it, self-driving cars funded the research because they really don't want to hit prams. Instant segmentation is classifying instances of objects. So saying this is sheep A, this pixel belongs to this particular sheep, this particular pixel belongs to a different sheep. Panoptic is a combination of the both. The reason we want to use segmentation is that we need to isolate trees from their context. So in Christchurch, for example, New Brighton by the coast, most of the council maintained trees, they are cabbage trees. They do very well in that sandy environment. We don't want the model to make an assumption that cabbage trees don't get diseases or don't get certain diseases. And every time they see a picture of a tree with a sand dune behind it, they immediately say, hey, no problem, and give us a false negative. We want it to consider just the vegetation, not the environment. Also privacy. If we are taking regular photos of people, you know, people's front yards, we don't want pictures of people in their dressing gown collecting the newspaper on a regular basis. So to get some social buy-in there, we want to have some privacy preserving aspects to the project. Segmentation is used a lot in industry. It originally came out of medical research. The famous unique architecture was developed to classify portions of medical scans, like tumors or identify organs. As I mentioned, it's used a lot in self-driving cars, and that's where most of the funding's going at the moment. Ag research have used it to classify what's grown in particular fields using remote sensing data. And Manaki Whenua have used it to segment trees in Wellington from remote sensing aerial data, which is quite different from what we're doing. There's also object detection, and people are usually quite familiar with object detection. Object detection is drawing a box around an object. So it's saying the object exists somewhere within this space. So it's a much easier task to do than segmentation, where you're saying specifically what each pixel is. So on the left is, on the right is object detection. And you can see there are some coarse boxes around those trees. On the other side is an example of instant segmentation, where each pixel has been classified as one of those 3 common lime trees. So to create a segmentation data set was quite challenging because the hardware was still being developed. We use Google Street View's API to capture, to retrieve lots of photos of street trees in Christchurch. These kind of models require lots of data, 3,000 images. In the ideal world, you could hold a big sheep behind a tree, like you can see in that one picture, and then be able to easily draw around the outline of the tree. But the real world, it's a very, very time-consuming task. So here's an example of a tree done by segmented by a second-year forestry student. That's the blue that she drew in, and then the original image, you can see that too. That took her 16 minutes to segment, very time consuming. It's just one with 3,000 images. You might think if you zoom in, it's an easier problem. It's not easier. Resolution doesn't actually help. It just makes it more time consuming. This is an English elm. This I know was taken in a Pawa, and it's got an oak tree in the background. This took 13 minutes to segment, and when you zoom into the elm tree, I mean, it just looks like random noise. What's fascinating is that the student, you know, we found the students were like drawing, because they're forestry students, they look at trees all the time. They're drawing in branches that like couldn't possibly be discerned from the image. They're using all their built-in knowledge and their own neural network in their head to kind of figure stuff out that didn't exist. And I'd say, no, you can't give this model information that may or may not exist. You can only do what it can actually see. So it was a real hard task doing this. We came up with some techniques to speed this process up that I won't go through in this presentation. But yeah, it was challenging. So for people who are into the machine learning aspect of things, I'll briefly touch on the technical details. The segmentation model uses the Deep Lab v3 architecture with a ResNet 101 encoder. It has 45.7 million parameters, which is relatively big, although, you know, ChatGPT is, I think, in the hundreds of billions. The test result we got from this model using the Jaccard index, or the mean intersection over union class average, was 0.68. I've been asked to describe how good this is. It's really hard to say. You can see the formula for intersection over union in the bottom corner. It's a worst case metric, so every mistake penalizes you both on the numerator and the denominator. For Cityscapes dataset, that car driving dataset I showed earlier, the state-of-the-art models at the moment are getting 0.8 something, but it's a much coarser data set. There's a lot less fine detail. There isn't really many people doing fine detailed segmentation like this for vegetation type objects that have lots of holes in them. So I think it's really good, and it compares really favorably with the ability of humans, in many cases does better. So I'm going to show you some where it falls over first, some bad examples. So let's make sure I get my left and right so it's different from my screen. On the far left, you've got the ground truth. And then on the far right, we've got the test image. So the test image was the model, the image fed into the model. The model, I don't know if I'm getting it wrong on the Zoom, but the test image that's labeled there is that image was not seen by the model when it was training. And so when you feed that image in, it produces the middle image there, which is the prediction, where colors indicate tree species. And then the image on the other far side is what a human being did when they tried to annotate that particular tree in the image. You can see in this one, it actually correctly got the sweet gum, but I thought there was an oak and a silver birch there in the corner. And that's a worst case error, because a human would never make this particular mistake. We have an idea why this model made this mistake, and that's something we're working to correct. In this one here, the model correctly got the silver birches in green, but it thought there was an oak tree there in the side, which it's not an oak tree. But when it's good, it is ridiculously good. This silver birch is, I think, done actually, its prediction was better than what the human being did. And this image I'm especially proud of. Again, this is an unseen image. The model was not trained on this image. I annotated this image myself, so that's why I like it. It was a really hard image to annotate, because you've got 3 cabbage trees surrounded by shrubbery, and there are trees in the background, and it successfully managed to pull out all 3 of those cabbage trees from the environment. It doesn't get the fine palm fronds, but that's an architectural problem. That's something that we want to work on. And here's another one of a strand of oak trees. And yeah, it gets it just as good as the human being, the annotation. So for something that takes a human being, 10 plus minutes to do, the model can do the prediction in under a second. It's crazy good. We trained it specifically so that it would ignore images that were on private property, so behind, further away behind streets, behind fences. And we didn't know whether they'd be able to pick up on that contextual spatial information, but it did, and that was amazing. So it does have a good idea when something is behind a fence that it's not something we want to take into account. So it's really good. We are just focusing on street trees for this. So the idea is our overall idea is known threats can be detected using classification models trained on images. For example, that photo I showed you from SBS Biosecurity of existing pest and disease symptoms. But it's feasible to build an AI model that can detect every possible pest. There just isn't a lot of data. We've in fact been scouring the world for data on certain diseases, trying to find photographic evidence of this disease to build models. And certainly, for unknown threats, it's just not possible. So instead of looking for specific pests, we propose creating a digital twin of every individual tree specimen maintained by councils in various cities. So for one model for every single tree in Christchurch, for example, and then monitor that digital twin model for changes over time. So, for example, a healthy deciduous tree temporal changes would look like this. This is a simulated tree that I simulated. Vaguely resembles an oak tree. So you can see in November, it would be like you expect, a lot of green foliage. March, the foliage is getting less green. April, it's lost a few leaves and it's brown. And then May, it's starting to lose a lot of leaves, and the leaves are going quite brown. This is what you'd expect an oak tree to look like. An unhealthy oak tree might look like this. In November, it's looking good, but in December, branches start having dying leaves. January, different branches are now exhibiting the same symptom. And then in late January, it's not just losing leaves, but like the problem is spread. So we can either monitor an individual specimen, a geographical cluster of specimens, or we can monitor a specific specimen and compare it to its geographical peers. So compare an oak tree in a street with all the other oaks, within 500 meters of it or along the same street. Because not all anomalies are in fact problems, right? So this is a common lime tree that I go past every day to university. And on the way back one day, that's what it looked like. Tree Tech and arborist in Christchurch had been at it because it was going right over a neighboring property. They cut it right back. So the tree on the one side would be a very common example of a lime tree in Christchurch. It wouldn't be an anomaly, it would be in the middle of the bell curve. The other example would be an extreme case of a lime tree. There wouldn't be many lime trees right this moment in Christchurch that look like that one. So this is an example of an anomaly that isn't a problem. The benefit, of course, if a tree inspector got sent this picture, they'd immediately see, hey, arborist has been to it. It's not a disease. We don't need to even drive out to inspect that particular example. So in conclusion, urban forests are potential first establishment points due to diversity and due to proximity to ports of arrival. Tree segmentation models combined with anomaly detection models and pest classifiers will be important tools in the future for protecting our biodiversity. Tree health inspectors can't be everywhere. These tools don't replace tree health inspectors, but it will be a force multiplier for them. It'll increase the time they spend looking at trees that may have problems or do have problems versus inspecting trees that are healthy and noting as such. It's important to identify pests early, and tree inspectors, even if we doubled the number of inspectors and number of inspection hours we had, we could still do with more. Anomaly detection models can identify the high priority sites. So the next step is the logistics of large-scale data collection over an extended period of time, and that is quite a challenge. So thank you.